So I've actually got 4 sets of slides that we don't necessarily need to go through, but I thought I'd come well prepared. Probably the easiest thing for me to start with is to show you one of the systems that we've developed and how our project came about from that. So we've come up with this system called TTM, Task Test Monitor. So this is joint work between myself and my colleague friends and 2 of our students. So the whole idea was to get into bite-sized learning. We wanted students to go through a repetitive cycle where they would perform a task, we would test their understanding, and we'd monitor their progress. That's what we call this system, Task Test Monitor. So the system itself, people look at it and the first question is, how is it different to Black? Is it an LMS? Not really. What we've built is a custom-made system that's a test bed for various things that we want to do in education and in learning. So our idea is to run various experiments on that throughout our career, or how long we decide to stick with it. In terms of what we've done at this point, the feedback that we're focusing on is giving feedback that's immediate, formative and summative feedback. So you can get feedback on individual students and also your entire cohort, so whoever's in your course. So this is my backup plan, which shows a bunch of pictures.
When you set the feedback, is that the student can get the feedback? Or?
Yep, so that's one of the things that I discussed with Erica. It's a bit, our perspective on this is different. So I think you guys are looking from top down.
Possibly.
We're looking from bottom up, so from the student level, so giving students access to analytics so they can analyze themselves and to train them how to use that.
If you just do a refresh on that, because we're microwave link.
So this is the system. As a student, you would come in and log in here. So it takes your CAS login, so you don't have to create another account. Very important for students. They get sick of creating all these different accounts. The home screen, a list of courses that you're enrolled in. So this is one of the courses that I teach. So all the weeks of semesters will come up here. So for example, week 1. So each week is broken up into tasks that they have to perform, and usually tasks will have tests associated with it. So the tasks appear as a PDF, so instructions about what they need to do. When they've completed it, they may need to submit a file that they can drag and drop here. There's some self-reflection questions here that they go through, and that submits to the system. So if I finish this task, I'll need to do the related test. And with that, again, it's a PDF, 5 multiple choice questions, 4 answer options, fairly standard. So this is just reading the test. If you want to actually take the test, you fill out your answers here. So I'll fill out
if in doubt, C. It's always C.
I avoid putting C as answers.
Heard about people like me. Know the code.
So once you've done that, you can get feedback on that test. So these are your questions, the answers you've selected, whether they're correct or not, and the feedback there. An important point here, the feedback when your answer is incorrect doesn't give away the right answer. It gives you information as to why the answer you selected is incorrect. If you selected a correct answer, it tells you why it's correct, because students may have guessed C. So I've attempted this test 4 times. I can look at my previous attempts.
It's pretty intensive structure.
Yeah.
Putting to that.
There's quite a bit of work.
Yeah.
So this graph will give you the last 5 attempts. So this is for test 1.1, test 1.3, and all your other tests. There's an analytics section. It's not really analytics, but that's the label we slapped on it for now. And these are all the courses that I'm enrolled in. Obviously, I shouldn't be enrolled in that many courses. That'll give you your progress to date as sort of a snapshot.
Like a dashboard.
Yeah. If I go down to that individual course, so these are the week numbers and the performance that I've had. So this is the highest performance. So that gives you an overview how you're performing in one particular course. I can drill down to a particular week number, and that gives me my performance. So the best scores I've obtained on those tests. As an instructor,
For the student, that's for the student perspective.
yes.
So is there anything for them comparatively to see how they're tracking compared
One
to
of the things we need
cohort?
to add is in here, so on these charts, to put the min, max, and average of a class. But those are still very basic things, and probably in here as well, but to give them an indication of how they're training.
Nice.
For an instructor, if we go to monitor, so monitor the task. This is task for week 1. So these are all the submissions that students have had. You can see that students can make multiple submissions, so you can look at the test as well. So test for week 1. I can order by section ID. And you can see this guy has submitted test 1.1 twice, but 5 both times. So that's, I guess, the general system. Just to give you a quick overview of it. Skip a couple of slides.
Pardon my ignorance in regard to Blackboard, but can this be done in Blackboard?
We have a link from Blackboard to this system. The problem with Blackboard is it's a closed system.
There's just one problem.
Well, one big problem. It's a closed system, so we can't get in there. So it's just a whole lot easier for us to have a separate system that just provide a link to it. And because this uses the RMIT login, students have to log into RMIT to go to Blackboard anyway. So when they click the login, they don't have to log in again. So when they click the link. So it's relatively seamless.
So when you say closed system, what do you mean?
It's more of a, I guess from a, my background is I'm actually formally trained from computer science. So from a programming standpoint, you can't hook into those systems, where systems like Moodle are open systems where you can connect to them and add things in it, write your own plugins, get data out, push data in. Blackboard can't do it. Not from a programming standpoint anyway. I mean, you can download data as Excel files or CSVs or whatever and push it back in there, but that requires human intervention, and we'd like to automate things, so we're not doing that over and over again.
The new version will have an open API.
But it's whether we get that version, when we get it, and so forth.
Indeed.
So in terms of analytics, I hear Blackboard has an analytics module, but our license, our version, we don't have it. How long do we want to wait?
Can't wait.
So that's one of the reasons we build this custom made. We can get it to do pretty much whatever.
What did you build it with?
The whole stack, the front end, Bootstrap and AngularJS, Node.js as the web services, and MongoDB as the database backend, if that makes any sense. Probably not worthwhile me going into it. It's fairly flexible. We can do a whole bunch of things.
Yeah, that's very nice and clean.
Yeah.
The way you designed it too, I quite like that. Looks like a bit like a Google thing in a way.
Well, AngularJS is what Google developed to build their web apps like Gmail and so forth. So that's why it has that look. And in terms of the UI, it's called Bootstrap, and that's from Twitter. So that's why it's sort of that. Not the best example, but it uses what you call a responsive design layout. So you see how these things are there. So if I change the window size, the layout changes.
Okay.
So that means you can look at it on a mobile device.
That's a lot better than Blackboard, isn't it?
Well, Blackboard will be the next version.
Everyone's been telling me about this
I keep on hearing about
for
this
a long
next version.
time.
No, I'm not here to promote it. It's it'll still be Blackboard.
I haven't even got confirmation that we're getting it.
I keep on hearing about it, but I'm not.
No, I've seen it. We've been to the demos and stuff.
Somebody's got to cough up some money, and that always takes time. So in terms of features for instructors, And this bit of the system is not as polished. So what I did is I ran some scripts that connects to the database and provides graphs and tables. So this provides a list of the different test IDs, total attempts that students have made. So this is for an entire class. The average score, the minimum score, and the max score. So that shows you a trend. And I did this around, I probably ran this script around week 6. You'll see that, of course, there's a lot and it drops around this week. Some people are working ahead. You can identify those students. So graphs on the different tests. This one's probably more interesting. So a histogram of different marks that students have attained. So these are just some stats. So the bits where it spiked, I think around week 4, that's because I had a class test the week after or around there. So you can pick up all those sort of patterns. So this is an individual student report. So this would be for a particular student on test 3.1. How many times they've attempted it, the scores that they've received. So this is a graph. So the scores have improved a bit. So for example, here, 3 times in a row they've gotten 80%, or they stuck on the same particular question. So these are things that you could, I mean the way I ran it in class, I would consult students individually every couple of weeks. So in the tubes, I actually get them to, because they bring their own devices, or in building 80, I tell them to come up, bring your own laptop, let's go through your own account. So I tell them to click around. So they sort of get used to the graphs and to understand it. I had a first year course, and some students will come up and show me the graphs and go, is this good? Right, so it's sort of, they pay attention to it, you just got to train them to use it.
That's interesting because if you got a pattern of that across, you could go back to that question and see what.
Yeah, so one of the things that I want to do but haven't done as well, run some reports. What are the hardest questions?
Yeah.
Is it because students have a common misconception or misunderstanding, or is it something that I'm not explaining?
Yeah, beautiful. Wow.
So here you can maybe pick up patterns. Maybe the students always trying to get 100%. We never told the students, these tests aren't assessed by the way. I just see them as learning activities. So we never told them you have to get 100% or whatever, but most of them do try to go for 100%.
So it's an informative
Yeah.
activity.
Yeah. So these are just some random scripts that we've run to pick up data. So these are across the weeks, and the reds are how many tasks were downloaded, so the PDF files. How many tests were downloaded, and how many tests were submitted. So you can see usage patterns there across.
More tests downloaded than submitted?
Week 12, the exam's coming up.
Yeah. So the test downloaded the PDF files. How many times they've accessed it?
Right.
It doesn't necessarily mean too much. I think
okay.
When I was a student, I used to download and keep everything. Students these days, I don't think they really do that. They expect to find stuff online all the time.
Yeah.
So they always look up the PDFs.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
But that does give you some rough indication about system usage.
Yep.
How did students go using it? Have you had their responses about how they find using it?
They enjoy it.
Yeah.
I've got some other graphs in
Sorry.
terms of researchy stuff a little bit later on. So these 3D matrix of tasks, tests, and so forth. Just to give you an idea of what we can get. So we haven't necessarily analysed that in terms of the data that's in there. These are test results by individual students. So each rectangle is a student. So here, maybe this is what you call a desirable learning behaviour. They're always trying to go to 100. So this is what, I call exploring feedback. Because if you've gotten 100% and you're only going for pure marks, there's no point in you sitting the test again. But students do try it again. So they drop and they go up. So I suspect that some students are just playing with the test to see what the different feedback is for each of the answer items. So not just trying to understand what the correct answer is or why this answer is correct, but also why the other options are incorrect. So that's a whole lot more interesting than just students trying to go for marks, right?
Nice hypothesis to test.
Yeah. So this is stuff from semester 2 last year. We used it in 3 courses. So as I said, I use it in class to review students' progress and help them diagnose issues and misconceptions. Other stuff you could use it for: flipped classroom, large class teaching, diagnostic tests. So the stuff that I'm supposed to talk about today is the LTIF project. So from that, what we're trying to do is to get students to use that for self-reflection.
Yeah.
So you need to train them to use it. So instead of just having additional workshops where they come up, where they come in and I train them, I try to do it in the classes. So I'd let them use this for a couple of weeks, and then I'd call them up one by one and say, well, let's see how you go. Also, because with students, you can always ask them how you go, and it's always good or alright. But with this, you have something evidence-based. You can go, let's see how you go, and then you can actually see. And they know themselves, you're in week whatever and they haven't done the work, and before you ask them, they'll start telling you, well, I was busy or whatever, but at least that it's there, it's something to discuss on. So that's one. So if you have questions, as we go along, I've got 4 sets of slides about different things just to inform you, but we don't necessarily need to go through all of it. Yes. So this is the actual LTIF project. So a whole bunch of people on it. So we're trying to use analytics more as reflection rather than prediction. A lot of people think of analytics and they think prediction. Predict who's going to be at risk and that type of thing. That's not our perspective on it, not for this project anymore. So by self-reflecting, helping students look at, giving the students the artifacts, they can reflect on their own performance, and us being there consulting them to help them with that. But one issue with learning analytics is you get a whole heap of data, you can analyze it any which way you want, but how do you get something useful for the students? So we've paired it with something called learning design, which is like a fancy name for sequencing of learning task resources and supports, which is pretty much what academics do anyway. So in general, all learning designs have resources, tasks to complete, and support mechanisms.
So do you track when you got like the tasks and all that sort of stuff? Who's looked at the task, who's done the task, and all that sort of stuff?
We've got a whole lot of things going. So I mean, there's explicit things that we look at, and the server logs a lot of other things in the background.
Like what?
Logins, when they've clicked on particular things, so all those type of things. Whenever they've interacted with the system, something is logged. So you get a whole heap of data. In fact, one of the guys that we have on the project, Simon Duff, he's from Splunk, which is an international analytics company. And what they do is they come over to an organization and look at their server logs. And they analyze that and try to find meaningful data from it. That hasn't come up. But anyway, so this is an example of learning design. You have a learner activity, you have a content or tool that feeds into it, and you have some sort of support mechanism. So once you complete one activity, the idea is to move on to another one. So this is resource, task, and support. So what we're trying to do is to find a way to use learning analytics and learning design together, so we can have a guide as to what needs to be informed, as opposed to learning analytics that you could do everything and anything. So there's 2 types of learning analytics that we're looking at. One is checkpoint analytics. So these are, I think, what people most commonly think of when you say analytics. So how many times did people log in? How many times did people download these files? And you get, whenever you say that to people, they'll just get this argument of, well, it's not really analytics, it's just system stats. But you can use this as an indicator of, let's say for example, if you have to carry out a task, if you haven't downloaded the file, it's pretty hard for you to carry out the task. So this is a checkpoint. Have you met the prerequisite to carry out this task first? The other part of it is process analytics, and that's looking at the learning process that students are living, and that's obviously more difficult. So some ways that this has been analysed is things like social network analysis. So social SNA analysis of student discussions, or content analysis of things. So down here. So our idea is that with the with checkpoint analytics, you're looking at the resources, whether they've been accessed. So that's the prerequisite to undertaking a task. And the process analytics will come from undertaking the task themselves, how well you've performed and so forth. So if we map that to TTM, this here is a resource, and this actual task file is, the PDF task file is a resource themselves. Have students access that. So we've chunked things into micro learning or bite-sized learning, so things are short duration. We've got scaffolding or sequencing, as they call it in learning design. So to do this task, you need to do task 4.1 first. When you finish that, you go and do this other task or quiz. The test is more looking at the performance, so an evaluation of how well they've performed the task. It's a bit of a proxy measure because the tests will try to match the task as much as possible, but it's not always the same thing. So you can retake the test many times and you get feedback for correct and incorrect answers. So from our perspective, matching TTM to learning design, our checkpoint analytics is about when they've accessed the resources, how many times, and the process analytics is on the task, so the test, how they scored, what scores have they received, how many times have they attempted it, is there a trend to their score, are they improving, are they decreasing?
So that one under resources to resources provided as part of tasks, you're tracking often they used a PDF or a video or which is what we all talked about originally.
Yeah.
Looking at, okay.
So at the moment the tasks are always PDF files, but from that you can have links to other things. Probably the more interesting thing that you can track with this is learning behaviour, so usage patterns. I guess with learning you can look at performance, which comes from the test, but then behaviour, which I think is much more interesting and a bit more rich in terms of, yeah, okay, you do a test and you get 80%. That doesn't tell you a whole lot. But if you can take that test as many times as you want, you can see patterns. You know, if you get 50%, you always try to get 100%, something like that. And if you take it in the wider context, all the tests in the courses, what's your trend with that? You always try to get to 100, or by about week 6, you lose interest and you're not really doing the test anymore. If you take that into even wider context, all your courses in a semester, are you trying to get 100% in this course, but in this other course you're not paying attention, or you're not even doing any of the tests? So it depends on what scale you want to look at. I mean, you could look at it so going from the semester to your entire year, to your entire career in the tertiary education. So it just depends on how much data you can get your hands on. This was to recruit people in my project.
Do the students actually have access to this data as well?
Which data?
Well, what you're pulling out here, you know, they might be interested to know how many, you know, taking a test numerous times, you know what I mean? And what that looks like, whether they got 100% the first time and then 80 the second time and then 20 the third time and then we're back up to 100 again. Do they have, that's that there?
This is the performance, this is a student's performance.
Okay.
So the student sees this actual screen,
Okay.
and that's the performance on test 1.1, is test 1.3.
Oh, nice, okay.
So we're still adding things, so we need to add the average and so forth. The other thing that we've recently added is this to-do list. So this, you can see the tasks that you need to do. So this is time-based, we're in week 3. There's nothing about week 4 onwards. So if it gets to week 4 and I haven't done anything, then it'll appear on there. So you can do that for your test as well, tests that I need to complete that I haven't. Also as a bit of positive motivation, stuff that I have completed, so the task and the test that I have completed. So the other bit that students see is these analytics.
Okay.
So they don't see the monitor section,
Okay.
because that's got other students on there. But I mean, we're sort of thinking if we can aggregate this data to show, I don't know, how many interactions on average students have had with the system compared to how many interactions you've had, then that might be an indication, as opposed to just everybody's getting 100%, you're getting 80%. What are you doing? Because that's really sort of just performance. Whereas if you get stuff on behaviour, it's more interesting. So other things from behaviour, are people trying to do the task and the test before the class, after the class, during the class? If most people are doing it before the class and you're doing it after the class, probably something that you want to know as a student. So this is in terms of results that you were asking for?
Yeah.
So this is only one aspect of it. We've carried out a survey and we're still going through the data. So this comes from my honours student, Tas, who analysed this in terms of feedback.
Yeah.
So this is coming from a paper that's I'm hopefully submitting tonight. Because that's the deadline. So in this one, we're looking at the quality of feedback, and we're looking at quality in terms of relevance, timeliness, and actually quantity. So in terms of the sample that we've had from a number of undergraduate courses, so that's about N equals to 65, and it sort of roughly matches the population. We used a retrospective pretest. So, are you familiar with that?
No.
Okay. So traditionally, you have a pre and a post test. So when you have an intervention, right? So you do a test pre-intervention and you do a test post-intervention. But because of ethics, sometimes you have difficulty. So if you're doing tests on your own students, if you're doing research involving your own students, they need to be anonymous. You can't know who they are and so forth. So we use a retrospective pretest. So that means they don't do a pretest. After the intervention, they answer 2 sets of questions. So this is before and this is after, to see if they've changed, if they've shifted in terms of their opinion and perception. So the way we've done it is a little bit different. So at about week 7, we told them to compare what you think about our course using TTM versus other courses that you've done before that don't use TTM. All right?
So you're talking about Blackboard?
Not so much the technology, just feedback in general.
Okay.
Right? So TTM, it's a system, but it's also an approach that we built using that system.
Yeah.
So TTM itself, the system is fairly flexible. You can use it for various things. We've used it in a particular way. So this item was feedback is related to the purpose of the task. So how relevant the feedback was. So in non-TTM courses, this is what they reckon, and this is what they think in TTM courses. You can see that it shifted towards strongly agree. The shift of the mean, so the average has shifted 0.27, which is not a great deal. But if you look at the movement in a total agreement shift, so the total agreement is agreement plus strongly agree. So that's shifted from something that's already high, 80%, to something that's even higher, 92%. This is relevance again. Enough information is provided to make feedback useful. So how much content is provided in the feedback. So again, the mean shift is fairly small, 0.33, but total agreement has shifted from 50% to about 67%. There's also a drop in total disagreement, which is the sum of strongly disagree and disagree. So I suppose what's positive is, in other courses, most people find feedback to be relatively good. So if you look at this bit, because not many disagree. But that's managed to shift their perception further up. Feedback is provided in a timely manner. So this is the biggest shift that we've had. The mean shift is 1. And total agreement is shifted 41%. And total disagreement has dropped 24%. But that's to be expected. I mean, I don't want to hype it too much, but if you're filling out a test and you get the feedback right away,
I want to please my teacher.
yeah. So if that didn't shift, I would be somewhat concerned.
But it's a really, in the strongly agreed, it's a massive growth,
Yeah.
which is a really positive on that.
But also then, how do you work out which of your teaching factors has made the difference?
I haven't. I'm not sure that I can either.
Yeah, so you couldn't go and then Yeah, so this is where we're starting to get interested. Is and what we want our project to be about is where can you get information of the type that you're gathering that looks at how you're presenting, and then works out, okay, next time I can present better this way because I've got this data that's showing that the students are not learning or appreciating that.
When you mean presenting, do you mean the materials that I present, or
How
the
you
way I
deliver it.
deliver?
Everything, yeah, anything.
That's a tough one because
Yeah.
you get teachers with good GTS scores and you get teachers with not so good GTS scores, and you want them to move up, but you can't really dissect what's giving you that good GTS scores, and that comes along, I guess, with some of that MOOC movement as well, where they're supposed to be renowned teachers, and you put them on a video, and instead of dealing with a teacher like me, you get this expert in that area. And it's to do with that, but I think it may be too complex to dissect. I don't know. So I should also mention that this is self-reported data from a survey. The other thing that we need to do is get the data from within the system and try to triangulate that. So that would clarify some of what you're asking, but I don't think it'll clear it up completely. So this is the quantity of feedback. I received enough feedback for my work, and that shifted 0.7 in terms of the min. And again, agreement's gone up 20%. Total disagreements dropped.
So what sort of tasks are they doing in the non-TTM courses? Because I would have thought, because the feedback's small, because it's a test, but I'm used to students who are writing an essay, so they're getting paragraphs. So I would have expected a decline in that one.
I guess some of the limitation of the systems, it's test oriented. So you need to be able to take your tutorial work, break it up into smaller tasks, and have tests that match them. And with a test, because it's multiple choice in terms of Bloom's hierarchy, you can get up to, say, about the applied level, right? Beyond that, it gets difficult with a multiple choice test. And beyond that, it becomes even harder to give automated feedback. So one of the things that we need to do later on is to have open-ended questions when you can type free text. And that's harder to analyze computationally. There's things there's research that have been done around that, but it's just more difficult. So we started with multiple choice because it's easier. In terms of essays, there is some automated approach where you provide what you think is a good essay, and the student provides one, and they get summarized, and then the summaries are compared to see how closely aligned they are, and that gives them some sort of score. But in terms of qualitative feedback, it becomes difficult.
I mean, I don't think that would, so I just think about this, like in my course, I could easily set tasks that link themselves to multiple choice. I teach research methods. They don't, the weekly activities are skill-based. But in my course, I would then, because they're used to getting feedback on a whole literature review, if I ask them, are they getting enough feedback? They might feel like it's declined, but that wouldn't matter so
compared
much.
to this, you mean?
Compared to a but it wouldn't actually.
You've got to do apples and apples.
I think you're right. I mean, I guess that's one of the other things we want to do. We've used this in mainly information systems courses where they've built systems. But we think this tool is generalizable, so you could use it in pretty much any course. But in terms of the effects that you're talking about, we don't know until somebody uses it in that particular context. So I'm trying to recruit people to use
my
it.
courses.
I
can give you plenty of numbers. I've got a lot of students.
So that's another thing that we're looking at.
And one of the keys is, you mentioned early on, I didn't say much more of it, is about learning preferences. So how that comes into play, and we'd had a bit of a discussion about that. So I thought we might be getting into starting to tease that out with the data available.
I mentioned learning preferences?
I thought you did. I was probably wanting to hear it.
I don't think I have.
I thought it was an LTIF project title in that summary. Sorry, I must have been.
But learning preferences.
Wants more than.
I guess my views of learning preferences, it shifts.
Is what?
It shifts. So a person doesn't have a fixed learning preference. So in light of learning analytics, why do you go bother trying to work out what somebody's preference is when that could shift? where I could just analyze this and look at the behaviour.
Mm.
I mean, if you know the preferences and what particular learning preference was in that particular context and the behaviour, you get more information. But with this, I guess we're more interested in looking at the behaviour and then taking that for sure. Yeah.
For staff, how many staff have used this? Like different staff?
1, 2, maybe about 3 or last semester, probably about 3. This semester we've got, because our course is run in Vietnam, so we've pushed that out to Vietnam, and that's something different, interesting as well, comparing the Vietnam behaviour and performance versus the Melbourne cohort.
Yeah.
Do you think it's more work for the teacher in some ways?
Initially, yes, because you need to set it up.
Yeah.
So writing those tests are horrible because you've got to come up with 5 questions. For each question, you've got to come up with 4 answer options. For each answer option, you have to come up with specific feedback to that. It takes an enormous amount of time. But in terms of the reuse that you get out of it,
just use the same thing.
plenty. Yeah.
What were the 3 or 4 that have used it? What were they saying about it? What did they like about it? What was the information they were gathering from it, which was of most interest for them?
3 or 4 that have used it is big me and some of the other people on the project.
Okay.
So I guess we sort of knew what to expect.
Yeah.
But the student themselves, they enjoy it, and they think it's useful. And when tests come up, and before the exam, they just use it to revise, although we didn't exactly tell them to do that. So they make that connections, they make those connections, and they see its usefulness. And in a way, I think it's good to address the lower level of Bloom's hierarchy. Everybody's trying to address higher order thinking skills. But if you look at some of the students, they could do with a lot of comprehension and recall, because that's not there. And you're trying to address higher order thinking, you're not going to get there because you don't have the foundation. So I think this is good for that. But in terms of what we get, I think we need to do a whole lot more work on the monitor side of it. So the things that I want to know is, at a glance, how people in my class are tracking. And then I might want to drill down to individuals. So at a glance, I think I want to see students who are doing okay, and students that aren't doing so well. So I can find the students that aren't doing well very quickly, and I can look at the individual data to see what they're not doing well, so I can address that. And when it comes down to large classes, I think that's probably more useful, because my classes aren't that big. Excuse me.
I remember a student as a early primary school, he would act a little dumb on the computer so he would get more time on it.
Is that right?
Well, he gets reinforced for,
Yeah.
he gets more help because he
Being Howard.
goes.
Yeah.
No, it wasn't me, but it's just someone who became a tech head. And so, are you rewarding those who are doing less well in doing that, in having that method?
By and large, I think students just do strictly what's necessary.
Yeah.
So if students were doing that, I wouldn't mind, because you'd be helping them actually learn.
And go over
Right?
it again.
Yeah.
Good answer. Yeah.
So, but with this, they're just trying to minimum amount of work to pass.
Sure.
And this I added in there because I sort of think it might be useful for you, possibly in terms of what you're doing. It's a paper that I read about a generic framework for learning analytics. So if you're going the top-down approach, this may be something that you might want to look at. So it looks at a generic framework. So these are different dimensions of learning analytics. And it gives you samples of one use case of how it addressed the different dimensions. I don't know if you've seen this paper, but I thought it was pretty interesting. And between stakeholders and so forth. So it seems that you guys are sort of at that level where, as we're going.
We're looking at both ends.
Bottom of
Yeah,
the
yeah,
That's why it's actually really good to see what you're doing.
But